This was psychological warfare. Not all punishments were executions by bullet. German units facing partisan resistance often carried out reprisal killings. Entire villages were accused without evidence. Soldiers were selected at random. Multiple post-war investigations confirmed that in some areas, groups of prisoners were locked inside barns and set on fire. Anyone who tried to escape was shot. The goal was not efficiency. It was spectacle. Survivors later testified that screams were meant to travel, to warn neighboring villages what resistance would cost. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe now, because the next few minutes reveal truths history books avoid. These acts were reported upward. They were rarely punished. Contrary to post-war myths, women were not immune. Female medical staff, couriers, and political workers captured behind Soviet lines were often labeled partisan collaborators. In several documented cases, women were publicly stripped and executed, shot after mock interrogations, used as examples to break morale. One NKVD report recovered after the war details 3 women executed near Smolensk, accused of spreading communist ideology. Their deaths were deliberately delayed, carried out in front of forced witnesses. Their names never appeared in German records. Not every German soldier accepted these acts easily. Letters recovered after the war reveal men who drank heavily, wrote obsessively, or begged for reassignment. One Wehrmacht soldier wrote, "We are told this is necessary. But necessary things should not follow you into your dreams." Yet refusal meant court-martial or worse. The system trapped everyone inside it. By 1942, reports of mass executions had reached even high-ranking German officials. Some quietly protested, not out of morality but fear of future consequences. They were right to be afraid. At the Nuremberg trials, the Commissar order became one of the most damning pieces of evidence. Signed documents proved these killings were not accidents of war. They were policy. Hitler's words had crossed borders, and they had crossed into crime. The Eastern Front was not just a clash of armies. It was a war inside a war, where ideology decided who deserved to breathe. Men were killed for armbands. Villages burned to make a point. Women executed to erase influence. This was not chaos. This was design. And the most terrifying truth? Most of it happened far from cameras, far from headlines, buried under reports marked classified. History remembers battles. But empires are truly exposed by how they treat the powerless. And in Hitler's war of annihilation, power meant the right to decide who would not survive the night. Imagine a war where surrender does not exist, where uniforms offer no protection, where being captured does not mean imprisonment. It means a death decided before you even speak. In the summer of 1941, Adolf Hitler signed a document so extreme that even hardened German generals hesitated before enforcing it. It was not announced publicly. It was not debated in parliament. It was whispered down the chain of command like a curse. It was called the Commissar Order. This single order transformed the Eastern Front into something far darker than a battlefield. It turned soldiers into executioners and ideology into a weapon sharper than any blade. According to the order, Soviet political commissars were to be executed immediately upon capture. No trial, no interrogation, no mercy. Not because of what they had done, but because of what they represented. Hitler believed the war against the Soviet Union was not a conventional conflict. It was an ideological extermination. Communism, in his view, had to be erased completely, and anyone associated with it was declared subhuman. German troops crossing into Soviet territory were not just invading land. They were carrying written permission to kill without consequence. And many obeyed. The terrifying power of the Commissar order lay in its clarity. There was no room for interpretation. Commissars were to be identified, separated, and shot immediately, often within minutes of capture. Eyewitness accounts describe scenes that never made official reports. Captured Soviet units were forced to stand in rows. German officers walked slowly along the line, pointing silently. Any man wearing the Red Star armband, anyone suspected of political education, was pulled aside. Some begged. Some tried to prove they were just soldiers. Most never finished speaking. German field reports later recovered show executions carried out behind barns, in forests, near mass graves dug in advance. In some cases, entire groups were shot simply because one man was suspected of being a commissar. The order poisoned discipline. Officers who questioned it were reminded, refusal was treason. The law of war collapsed quietly. While soldiers were executed quickly, some Soviet commanders met fates designed to terrify others. In occupied territories of Belarus and Ukraine, German security units, often SS Einsatzgruppen, used public executions as warnings. Documents and survivor testimonies confirm cases where captured Red Army officers were hanged slowly in village squares while civilians were forced to watch. Tied to posts and shot one by one, starting with the youngest. Left wounded intentionally, bleeding for hours as examples. In one recorded incident near Minsk, 10 captured officers were forced to dig their own graves, then made to kneel as shots were fired at irregular intervals, prolonging the terror. This was not battlefield necessity.